Good morning, and I'm really delighted and privileged that I have a chance to speak in this session here. And because I kind of actually fit in to the general theme. However, what I'm going to talk to you about is some overarching ideas of the Turkic world itself rather than Turkey in the modern sense. And Europe will become even more peripheral to what I'm going to discuss, but certainly is an important aspect. I would ask the chair kindly to actually remind me 15 minutes into the presentation to make sure that I don't speak for another 15 minutes past that. It can easily happen. So what I've titled my presentation today is about Eurasia's role in global society and technological transformation. I should also warn you that my research activity spans across a number of disciplines. So I'm a historian, social anthropologist, and a physicist. And you'll see that coming through. And at times it could get a little bit technical, but it could be fun. So let's try how we go forward. I'm also delighted to kind of report a new development. You'll see a number of affiliations I have there, the Central Asia Forum, which I direct, the Cavendish Laboratory, which is Department of Physics. But very recently, over the last few weeks, we've had an evolution of these institutions into what is now called the PKU Cambridge Jesus College Center. And we are hoping that the kind of activities that I will discuss here will both represent what we do in the center, what we'll be hoping to do in future. So this is a moment of introduction and how we can build links and collaborations. So in the beginning, I'd like to summarize and say a few extra words of what has already been discussed much over the last 2 days in the conference. Particularly, the idea of Eurasia and Silk Road has been discussed in a number of ways. But this map that you see over there, again, has been shown in different configurations. This land bridge, are you able to, is it displayed there? Yeah, it's all good, okay. Because I can't see how it's, okay, fine, that's fine. So you see this green land bridge. It's not bridging anything, it's just actually a continuum from heart of Asia all the way from Pacific into Central Europe. In a cliched way, one can say that this grassland, the steppe, which provided the fuel for the transportation of that era. It was the petrol of the era, the grass, which horses needed to eat and travel across. But this galvanized interaction in this space. It provided movement of both goods, ideas, and certainly people who took those goods and ideas across each other. But there's certain philosophical issues of how we think and talk about that, and that's what I want to focus on today. The modern maps of the same thing, the same area, are also interesting to compare. So a simple point being that the green belt is not exactly the Silk Road. It's further north of what is now normally talked about as Silk Road, historical, the ancient Silk Road. But the modern technology, i.e. the nature of transport changing actually away from the grass and the horse to oil itself, has and other ways of transporting, particularly the roads and the trains, have integrated the ancient Silk Road to the even more ancient Silk Road, the south and the north, and that changes the nature. It reconfigures how we think about the place itself. But a warning that a lot of what we say, and even I will say, comes from the perspective of settled societies, sedentary societies, writing about a world which was dominated, ruled, and governed by a very different kind of culture, the culture of nomads. So the urban versus nomadic discourse is particularly important, and a theme that will come up again in the beginning of my presentation is that how the history of the the nomadic people has been written by sedentary people. And very often the groups that went out, expanded out of Eurasia, whether they were traders or whether they were warriors, often were written about as barbarians, often written as brutal warriors. And this also puts in our minds a certain bias in how we think about the region. And those are important points from a historiographic perspective to keep in mind how we engage with the region in the modern context. So, in saying so, and don't bother reading all those so many words there, I'll summarize what I want to say from those things, but they're important to point out. The first problem that we face in understanding the region is that, especially discussing Silk Road and Eurasia, is that we think that there is a commodity in the East, particularly in China, specifically silk, and there's a market in the West, and everything else in the middle is just a highway. Things just pass through, back and forth. That couldn't be the worst description of what really was happening. The production, and last 2 days there have been a lot of sessions describing what was being produced in Eurasia, which was going out of Eurasia and fueling the cultural advances in sedentary societies. This is quite important to understand and appreciate. One of the things to point out is that the Silk Road has been a place of manufacturing, both of goods, ideas, and human capital that came out of it. This, of course, since it's a panel on, in a way, on Turkey, I should emphasize that it was the both proto-Turkic people as well as the Turkic tribes which were central to this endeavor, which is where the things were coming from. And they're again lost in discourse. And their endeavor, their achievements are put to the periphery of understanding. And despite it being central to the Asian or Eurasian continent, the endeavor itself, its achievements and goals, but they are periphery of the mind. They are not seen as central to any discourse creation. Particularly in the Western imagination, this is more prevalent than others. And I'm very happy that last 2 days, listening to colleagues from archaeology, this became more and more clear that is being undone, that's being questioned, and we're making progress in that area. To emphasize that, you can see this is the steppe area, the broader area, how around it the great civilizations of history developed, whether it was the Aegean and the Sumerians, Mesopotamians, the Chinese. In other way, how the steppe was the major ore and metal supply center of the old world. And it also is a reason, one of the reasons, why this global economic network, the global of that era, these civilizations were the globe. That's where the known centers where things happen, was connected through this, rather galvanized by this activity. So it's important, it's key to how and why technology, organization, and interconnectivity played an important role in shaping the world culture of that era. And that is something we forget. We talk in our textbooks, in our political lectures, in policy making about those distinct centers, but how they were actually connected through Eurasia and its production capacity. It was not a need in either Aegean, Egypt, or China, which got the nomads or the cultures of Central Asia to start producing something. It was actually other way around. And I'm glad I don't have to push this point more because it was made for the last 2 days by people who are more experts than me. But I want to jump further from that ancient era. It didn't only happen back then. It continued. And here is an example which is one of my favorite ones. The 9th century concept of mathematical concept of algorithm, of algorithmy, is very, very important, more than important. In fact, it's almost everything around us. What in today's world we have which doesn't run on algorithm. That comes out of Eurasia, present-day Bukhara. Of course, since I work in Cambridge, I have to put a little bit of our own angle into it. And I'm a physicist, it makes it even more important that I do that. The discovery of electron, the fundamental particle, which is at center of the functionalization of algorithm as a useful mathematical concept, is that happened in Cambridge in 1897. Combining algorithm with electrons discovery is basis of almost everything we do. This is, of course, a little bit romantic, but nevertheless, it's important to point out. But it's also important to point out that this gap of roughly 1,000 years was there before these concepts could come together to become useful for the global sphere. Equally, and I'm not going to go into detail of these things, apart from the materials production, the ideas that were coming out, we also had the other thing, the development of institutions which happened on the steppe and the regions which of course connected Europe to Asia. Mongol Empire, or Mongol empires, because Mongol Empire became Mongol empires very quickly in history. The point is that again, Mongols have an interesting place in history. They are one of the few people who conquered the world in a sense. But their history is written by those they defeated, not by themselves. So the vilification of Mongol Empire also inhibits our understanding and engagement from the past to the present. But the institutions created during that era, especially that of customs union, we can say in the modern terms, that you could enter into the realm of Pax Mongolica, trading, and you could easily travel across. Your security was guaranteed, your taxation regimes were clarified. That was already happening in Eurasia. Of course, today we would not compare EU or NAFTA or other organizations, but this is where it already started to happen. Again, yes, it is a bit romantic, but nevertheless, there are elements which we need to consider and think about. This continued. It was not a one-off that happened. And I'm just picking some of the major moments in history. We can see that after Mongol Empire, the Empire of Tamerlane, the Timurids, continued that trend. And the Turco-Mongol world, how it came together. To both put forward new ideas, new political concepts, as well as galvanize the trade and connectivity. So elements of globalization is the point that I'm trying to make, have been coming out of the region, not merely as distinct entities, but larger institutional frameworks, which continue to evolve and grow and find a way in global culture. However, that discourse is still not very popular one, and I think we want to revisit that. Then came the Soviet Union, which did that same thing for us. I won't go into it since I've been giving my warning, but I want to fast forward to something else. That gave way eventually to the modern day Central Asia, where we see these countries which emerged out of the Soviet realm. But here comes the problem. So far we've been talking about how connectivity was the key. We now look at the breakup of Soviet Union, in fact, creates a new problem, which is driven by a specific modern framework of thinking, principles arising from notions of Westphalian state. Each state which has emerged in Central Asia now, instead of engaging initially, must disconnect from the world, even from its neighborhood, to create institutions which will define themselves distinctly from each other, rather than seeing themselves as a connected world, which has political meaning naturally, an important thing in one side. However, the region's competitive advantage and what it delivers gets affected and mitigated, because now we're not looking at a continuity, but looking at how broken up borders come around and the narratives have to be developed around those things. But I'm hopeful, especially at this conference, that how OBOR and the Eurasian Economic Union kind of projects can perhaps help us again to reconnect that world. Indeed, it's a matter of discussion, and we need to think about it. I said already how Mongol and Timurid empires provided the institutional framework in which this connectivity happened in the past, and perhaps OBOR and Eurasian Economic Union could perhaps help us regain that foothold. So, what are the challenges and opportunities? So in the past, Eurasia was a dynamo of development, as we have tried to understand. But now I'm going to turn technical in the last few minutes that I have. That the natural wealth of vast materials, which was archaeologically important for millennia, can that be useful today? And now, just really going technical for a few minutes, it's very, very important to think about how the key technologies which are needed by global, or rather to overcome global challenges of energy, about sustainability and environment, have a solution, possibly an answer, coming from this Eurasia region. How to go beyond hydrocarbons and other thing called silicon. Silicon is another important point. It's something which is behind all the technologies that we have today, but it is one of the biggest energy consumer. The reason why we need to produce more energy is because we run more electronics and devices, which eventually need to be sort of modernized, and new solutions have to be found. The rare earth wealth of Eurasia, the metals wealth of Eurasia, is perhaps the next key answer. This I definitely don't encourage you to read. This is the technological framework coming out of the research that is being done or needs to be done, where the natural wealth from Eurasia can transform. These are very complicated technical terms I have put up there, but these are the technologies behind new generation of railways, new generation of computers, satellites, and even health related diagnostic related instrumentation. But this is not being done currently. Why? The reason is that the intellectual breakthroughs, intellectual property development has largely been done in the West so far, in the places where this natural wealth doesn't exist. So it is the moment to combine that global development of new science and relate it to the natural wealth of Eurasia. And I'm very heartened for the last few days. I met with my colleagues here in technical institutes who are thinking about these things. But this needs to be recognized. It needs a public and policy momentum to go with it. And since the time is more or less run out, I wanted to give you one example. The countries of Central Asia are very well known as oil producers. But oil is one thing. Oil will run out at some point. But a byproduct of oil, known as downstream product, is polymer. Polymer plastics is how you naturally interact with. In Cambridge and Stanford, in Heidelberg and Tokyo, technologies have been developed where you can turn plastic into electronics, into solar cells. It is much lighter, simple. It's not silicon, it's something different. But since in UK and Germany we don't have polymer production, that can transform the energy economy globally, not just in the West or in Central Asia. So the proposition is that going forward, the Western technology giants have identified potential to take the risk in the sense of developing these technologies at the scientific level. How can they turn into engineering solutions? How can they go into your household and your pockets and your cars is something that we need a connected approach across a Silk Road realm, across the West and East to take it to for public good in many ways. So there is a warning. As Eurasia reindustrializes, historically we have seen what it did. It's important not to fall into easy options, which are things like just focusing on information technology. It's an easy thing to have some people trained as programmers, but that's not bad. That's important. That's useful. But programs need computers to run on, chips to run on. How are you going to produce those in the next generation? Will they be efficient, which will be green? So that's where proposition of the natural wealth of Central Asia and Eurasia being redeployed is very important to overcome those challenges. It will create totally new sectors of industry which emerge out of Eurasia, just like they did 3,000 years ago. How bronze, iron and other ages came through. Now we're looking at a new age of post-silicon era to come forward. I would end there by saying that for this purpose, what we need is to increase capacity for science and engineering, not only innovation, because we need to look at the fundamental changes that can happen, diversify science space and research infrastructure. China is doing very well. India is doing reasonably well. But Russia and Central Asia are on decline, given that they were at the top of the research level at one point, not just 20 years ago. It's a new development paradigm. Those of us who study development studies tend to think about development needs to start from scratch, where there's nothing and create something new. But this is a new development paradigm. It is something which is in free fall, but used to be great. We need to rethink economically, politically, and culturally how we engage to arrest that fall for the benefit of global culture. So instead of, again, going further, since time's run out, I would stop here, unless the chair gives me one more minute.
Okay, we can move this to the...
Yes, discussion level, yeah. So I would stop. How do I get out of here? Yeah, there we go. Thank you.